Just share this link and we will be good to go. So thank you to everyone who's hopping in on the stream now on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter. Excited to be chatting with you all about a topic that's a big interest to me. And I know a lot of my listeners out there have been tuning in eager anticipation of sports betting becoming legalized here in Connecticut. So from News 12, we've got John Craven joining us. He's been on this story from the start, covering all things up at the Capitol. So John, thanks so much for hopping on tonight.
Thanks. I got off the Noah's Ark to join you tonight. Oh my goodness, it's raining so much.
I know. And pretty soon the state's going to be raining down in money thanks to sports betting, hopefully.
Yeah, they say that. I think eventually they're looking at I don't know, the estimates have been kind of all over the place. Between 40 and I think 70, 75 million a year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so pretty good number there. But as we're getting close to the NFL season, we're starting to hear the talks of things picking up about when this might start falling into place. I know yesterday we had a big meeting to approve some regulations, but I wanted to get your opinion. Looking back on this from the start, when Governor Lamont started trying to get sports betting done, take us through. This has been a pretty arduous process, if I'm getting it right, in terms of negotiating with the tribes and finally be able to getting things into place where we're even talking about implementing this.
Yeah, and it started long before Ned Lamont too. I mean, this was something that Dan Malloy really tried and failed to get done. I mean, you just had all these parties that were so far apart. Really, it goes back about 30 years when, Connecticut wanted to really get on the ground floor of the casino game. And so, they signed this exclusive deal with the Mashantucket Pequots and the Mohegans to open the tribal casinos. And it's been a really lucrative partnership for everyone involved. I mean, they give the state a quarter of all their slot revenue, which comes out to roughly $200 million a year. That's solid money for the state. And the state did not want to jeopardize that. I mean, obviously.
Right. Yeah.
So there was always this talk of, well, we're not going to really move forward on this unless we get buy-in from the tribes. But at the same time, the tribes wanted to control the entire, I guess the entire sports betting process. And that was really sort of untenable to the state.
Right. So we go through, we get these negotiations done. Legislature passes sports betting, the bill around that. Governor Lamont signs it. Now there are a few steps that need to happen before we're able to get this kicked off. The casinos weren't able to just implement it right away as soon as the governor signed. And I know a big part of that was yesterday in terms of the regulations. So take us through what that looked like and what they were looking at and kind of where that stands in the process of getting things closer to being able to get kicked off here.
Yeah, I mean, that was a big step, but I mean, obviously they're cutting it real close, right? I mean, kickoff is next Thursday.
Right.
And also that's the final day that the federal government has to sign off on this. They either, because it involves the tribes, the Bureau of Indian Affairs has to agree to these changes to the agreement that the state has. I mean, that's sort of considered a formality, especially under the Biden administration. And if they do nothing, then it's just sort of assumed that the federal government doesn't have an objection and they'll go forward anyway. So really, I mean, that step is sort of assumed that's going to happen in the next few days. So, the last big step was, okay, let's get this, rule book, if you will, of, these are the rules of the road. This is how, online games are going to work. This is how, sports games are going to work. It seems simple. People tweet at me all the time. They're like, why can't they just get this thing going? But I mean, but like when you get down to the nitty gritty of it, it's a lot. I mean, not only do you have to deal with, problem gambling, you have to deal with, security. You have to deal with like what they call geofencing, which is making sure that, if you're a player, that you're actually in the state of Connecticut. And,
right.
it's easy to, use a VPN or route your server somewhere else to spoof, to spoof the security. So they had to work out all that technical language, and that took a long time. And even yesterday, when this group of state lawmakers that approves
Yeah.
regulations, like even then, a lot of them felt like we're rushing this just so we can get this online in time for the NFL season. We feel like there are a couple of issues that are still unresolved. And keep in mind, these rules, they were passed under what's called emergency language. So they're not the final rules. It's just kind of to get things going. I think within the next 6 months, they have to have a public comment period, and then they'll issue final rules, by early 2022.
Okay. In terms of this having to go under like an emergency regulations meeting here, was that just simply to speed up this process and try to get things as close to kickoff of the NFL season as possible?
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, because normally the way this works is the legislature has what's called a regulation review committee, and it's a bipartisan group of lawmakers that basically, I mean, no one ever watches their meetings except for nerds like me. But like, I mean, normally they're just passing like regulations for plumbers and stuff that
Yeah.
nobody pays attention to. But this is a new industry, and so they're in charge of approving the rules. But typically, these things go through kind of a lengthy process of public comment, public input, and it can drag on. So the feeling was, if we do all that, we're going to miss the entire NFL season. And I mean, every week that the tribes and the Connecticut lottery are not taking bets, they're losing millions of dollars.
Exactly.
So there's been a real push to get this done. And I mean, I don't want to say it's not going to happen by next Thursday, but it seems really unlikely to me. But I think in the next few weeks they'll be up. I think by week 3 or week 4 for sure.
Mm-hmm. In terms of the way the vote went yesterday, I know it was bipartisan. We had some yeses, we had some nos. Of those who voted no on it yesterday, what were kind of the holdups behind it in terms of their decision to vote no?
Yeah. So again, I mean, it was for Republicans, and they really kind of stressed that hey, like we're Republicans, we're free market guys. Like we're not trying to be a nanny state here, but we just really worry that that there aren't enough protections in place. I mean, one of the things that they talked about was how you put money in your gaming account, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you can use a credit card in your name, but it could, or a debit card, but like that bank account could be a joint account for a couple. And let's say like I'm married, and like I have a gambling problem, and I'm up all night on my phone, betting on games or casino games. My wife doesn't know I'm doing that, and all of a sudden, after a week, I've cleared out our account. So that was a big concern. There are other concerns that the games don't have, especially like the online casino games, that they don't have like an automatic trigger that like
Mm-hmm.
after you've lost so much money, you get cut off at least for 24 hours or something. And I can't tell you exactly why that wasn't written into the legislation. I don't think that's, or the regulations. I don't think that's the way most states do it.
Okay.
So they kind of just looked at like New Jersey and other states that have been doing this for a while and said, okay, well, we're going to sort of start with that and move on.
In terms of looking at other states and what they've been doing, did they seem to pretty much copy and paste, or were there any tweaks that you heard of that were different and kind of specific to Connecticut compared to some of the other states that already have this in the area?
That's probably a level of knowledge about this type of regulation that's beyond my pay grade. We've done a couple stories with a guy named Dan Wallach, who's a pretty he's a pretty well-known gaming attorney. He'd probably be able to answer that for you. I mean, the state consumer protection commissioner said that was sort of the basis, but they also feel like they've gone beyond in a lot of states. I mean, they feel like I mean, they feel like they've created, the most protective rules in the country. And, this joint bank account issue,
Right.
like they really hammered her on that yesterday. And she said, look, the law, like our lawmakers have decided that, that this is going to be a legal thing and we want adults to participate in it. And we don't want to make it so
Hard.
onerous to
Yeah.
do it that, that people aren't going to be able to participate. Like how many married couples have an individual bank account?
Right.
So like, I mean, you're cutting out a lot of people from participating in a legal activity if you require them to open up their own bank account. And
Right.
that was her argument about it. And again, for the Republicans, you weren't sold on that.
Mhm.
But I think, they might have come around if, again, there was some sort of trigger that kicked in. And I think they were less concerned about sports betting, to be honest, than
And
they
more
were
of
about the
that.
online table games.
Are those two linked together throughout this whole process? Say, if there were still questions about the online table games, could they advance sports betting and kick that off while they worked out some of these other issues? Or are those two linked together to the point where, they're not going to offer one without the other at this point?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, the legislation was written to allow them both.
Mhm.
And so the legislation really charged the consumer protection authorities to come up with regulations for both fairly quickly. So I don't
Mhm.
think you could really push one off. And
Okay.
also, I don't think there's any appetite for that. I mean, the obviously the tribes really want to get both going.
Right.
I mean, when you talk about like online table games, I mean, Foxwoods and Mohegan Sun, they got killed during COVID because,
Right. No one
they
could
had
go.
they
Yeah.
had shut down for 2 months, and even after they reopened, it wasn't the experience people like when they go out to the casino. So, so their revenues really went down last year, whereas, like in New Jersey, like the Atlantic City casinos made more money because people just, I mean, they were in quarantine,
Their
so they were
home.
just
Yeah.
gambling on their phone all day.
In terms of the other portion of the sports betting in particular is going to be that they will be offered in-person locations
Mhm.
too. Say, do those two have to be launched at the same time? Is that expected, or could say they go ahead and open up in-person sports betting for next Thursday if they wanted to for the start of the season while they were still waiting on some of the online issues?
Okay, so I mean, there's nothing really to stop them from doing online at the same time.
Okay.
I mean, all of this is contingent upon the federal approval, right?
Right.
And so as soon as they get that, the tribes say we're ready to we're ready to get
Turn
up
things
and
on.
running.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, I think for the tribes, online is what they really, really want to get up and running right away because people don't have to make the drive out to Southeast Connecticut, right?
Right.
But I mean, but they also make a lot of money when people come to Foxwoods because they'll stay at the hotel, they'll buy drinks,
Yeah.
they'll gamble some more in person.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's a lot more money to be made by the in-person experience. And I know, Foxwoods is planning. I believe they partnered with DraftKings, and
Yeah.
so they are planning sort of a temporary spot
Okay.
to do sports betting for now, and I think that's ready to go as soon as they get the state approvals. But in the long term, I think in the next few months, they're planning on having a DraftKings themed lounge.
Mm.
That's what they've told us, that it's going to
Yeah.
be kind of a luxury lounge space.
Very cool.
I don't know if it's going to be comparable to what you see in Vegas,
Right.
but I mean, I think that's the experience they're going for.
In terms of that approval and getting things kicked off, as soon as now that these regulations were passed yesterday, say tomorrow, the Bureau of Indian Affairs from the federal government was to come down and approve, is there anything from stopping them from getting things up and running? Could, as simple as turning on a switch, if that's how easy it was for them to get this up and running, is that something they could do if they wanted?
Yeah, it's not that easy. And that was kind of the focus of our story yesterday. I mean, we were waiting for these regulations to come out to see, okay, what are all the hoops they're going to have to jump through, regulatory hoops, to actually flip the switch, right? Because that's the question I get over and over, like, what day is this going to happen? And that's really hard to tell. And I wish I could answer that for you. I can tell you that the new rules have a series of things that have to happen before you can flip the switch. How fast those happen, I can't really predict. But I mean, it names like a whole laundry list of key employees that have to obtain a license from the state. The state has to the vendors, in this case the lottery and the two tribes, they have to bring in an independent lab to certify any new game. They also have to show that they have physical security built around the table games area. So again, I think for the online casino games, they have to do a 1 week soft launch on a limited number of players to work out the kinks. So I reached out to Rodney Butler, who's the
Foxwoods
Mashantucket Pequot chair, yesterday, and I asked him how long you think that's going to take, and he wouldn't really answer it per se. They basically just said, look, we feel like we're ready to go. So the way I read that answer is that we anticipated having to do X, Y, and Z, and we have already prepared all that. So I think the ball is going to really be in the Department of Consumer Protection's court. They're the ones who actually have to enforce these new rules. So I think it just depends on how fast can they sign off on getting key employees licensed and checking the security and all that. I mean, and I don't really know whether they've devoted extra people to that. I mean, presumably, if the vendors have all their ducks in a row, that process could be days.
Right.
But we asked Governor Lamont about it yesterday, and he sort of indicated that we want to get this going fast, but we want to do it right. So if that takes a few extra weeks, then so be it. So that sort of indicates to me that that's probably the timeline we're looking for, is again, like maybe week 3 or week 4 of the season.
I think you stole the last question I had for you. I was going to say sports bettors love over-unders. If we had to set an over-under of, say, the end of September, do you think this is up and running by the end of this month?
I mean, maybe, yeah. Again, like I said, the wild card here is I don't know how fast the state regulators are going to move. The actual people who have to do the licensing and all. And government moves slow. I know the Lamont administration is pushing them to do this quick. There's a lot of pressure on them to get these people licensed, get this up and running. So if I had to wager, I'd say it happens sooner rather than later. I definitely would not bet on next week. But I think this month is a distinct possibility. Yeah.
All right. Well, John, I really appreciate it. And everyone stay tuned to John's reporting. He's on top of all this. So as soon as this is approved and ready to go, John will fire off a tweet and we can all go crazy. So John, appreciate the time. Enjoy the rain tonight. And we'll have to talk again once this is all up and running and see
back
how
to the arc.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks so much, John. Have a good night.
Thanks. You too.
Yeah.